So amazing. It's 2 years since our very first think tank. Isn't that amazing? I thought it was a bit of a breakthrough today. So in the chat, just identify which land, states, clubs you're coming from today. That would be good. And this month we've all, well, this time our issue at the moment has been communicating about the prickly subject of climate change. I just had to find a way of using that picture. It was just so delightful. We've got welcoming to Jane today. We've got Lesley Sweetman talking, and then we'll go through our international club and district news. We usually welcome everybody, and our acknowledgement of country, that we acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands in all the places that we meet today, and pay our respects to their elders past, present and emerging. We usually feature an Aboriginal female leader, and today I'm acknowledging Senator Jana Stewart, who's from the Senate from Victoria. And she says, an important message to all women that you belong in Parliament and in all places where big decisions are made, no matter what stage in life you're in. I thought that was lovely. And in 2021, not only was she the youngest First Nations woman elected to the federal Parliament, she was actually 35 weeks pregnant at the time. And so she's just had her baby. Anyway, I thought I'd just acknowledge Senator Jana Stewart today. For those of you who have not been associated with Zonta Says Now, oh, Tyril's here, good. Zonta Says Now. What we're looking at is increased greenhouse gas emissions cause global warming and the extreme weather events that trigger social disruption that magnifies any existing inequalities, including gender inequality. Zonta Says Now works at both ends of the train by taking climate action and closing the gender gap. And we're creating a gender equal, sustainable world by educating girls, advocating for women's rights and inspiring more female leaders. And we do this through our website, which I need to check up on, our think tank meetings and our framework for action. And we've developed many resources along the way to help us achieve our aims. Today, I'm going to hand over now to Sue Lees to introduce Jane Stabb. I'm absolutely delighted to have her today. I'll hand over to our stop share and hand over to you, Sue, so you can introduce Jane.
Well, thank you, Jane, for being here today, especially when you've got sick children. We never forget those memories. So Jane is CEO for Climate for Change. So Jane has worked in the climate space for at least the past decade, and she believes very much in leveraging the power of the ordinary person. So Climate for Change is basically about developing a conversation program about climate change that people can have in their homes, with friends, in their workplaces. So Climate for Change believes that social change happens through engaging with people we trust, such as friends and family, work colleagues, and then that leads to people being more likely to take action. So I think that's a really important concept that sometimes we tend to forget. As I was researching on Jane and Climate for Change, I actually thought it's actually good for us, even though we're in the climate space and we're very committed to it, for us to understand what other people are going through when they come to that climate space. And so having these conversations can actually help us do it and do it in the best way possible, because sometimes, unfortunately, people who have taken on the climate mantra tend to sometimes preach rather than actually engage in conversation, and we need to be really careful that we don't do that type of thing. So basically, Jane's going to tell us about their program, how it runs, why it runs, how it's worked. They've done a lot of research on it, which is really great to see that they've got the research to back it up. So I think it's a great opportunity for us to learn and maybe to engage formally with Climate for Change, also to learn how we can have more informal conversations if we want to. So thank you, Jane.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. And I loved both of your introductions. I am a proud female leader in a sector where there are a lot of staff and volunteer women and still very few female leaders. And I am one of 2 co-CEOs in my organisation. I put my hand up for the role. I've been in the role now for 18 months, and my co-worker, Lena Herrera-Pekarski, is a mother as well. She's got a 10-month-old baby now, would you believe it, and is a co-CEO. She's an absolute inspiration. And we could not have done this role. We both considered putting our hands up for the role full-time solo, but decided against it because, you know, part of the reason I care so passionately about climate action and ensuring a safe future is because I love my family and I care so desperately about ensuring that we have a safe future for them. And it also means that I want to hang out with them. I've got 2 little kids and I don't want to spend a fair chunk of my life working. And so I'm absolutely passionate about the model of co-leadership and female leadership. And I am constantly reminded that I stand on the shoulders of giants and women who've been in leadership before me. And I'm always appreciative of groups like this, of incredible women. And so I just want to say, I feel really privileged to talk to you today. I think you said, Sue, that I had 20 minutes. Feel free, I'll just talk and feel free to interrupt me and give me the wrap up if you need to get on with your other business. I won't be offended if you have to kick me off. But I might tell you a little bit about myself to start with and how I came to this role before sharing a bit about the organisation. Like you said in your introduction, Sue, we support people to have effective conversations about climate change. We've got a formal structure that we engage with that I'd love for you to consider for your organisation, and I can also share some tips and tricks at the end if that's useful for you as well. But by way of introduction, like you said, my name's Jane Stabb. I am one of the co-CEOs of Climate for Change. I'm today calling in from Wurundjeri Woiwurrung country down here in Melbourne. I grew up in a beautiful town about an hour north of here. It's called Macedon, right on the meeting point of Wurundjeri Woiwurrung, Taungurung and Dja Dja Wurrung countries. And it's right at the southern tip of the Great Dividing Range, a beautiful wombat state forest for those who know the area, a beautiful stringy bark woodland. You know, there's wombats, there's koalas, there's kangaroos. It's so beautiful. We've still got a family place out there. And it's in a bushfire zone. It was one of those towns that got burnt out in the 1983 Ash Wednesday fires. And as a kid, bushfires came close to our place every year. I was one of those kids that grew up with a bag packed, waiting by the back door all summer, ready to go at a moment's notice. I remember our bushfire plan as kids was that Mum and us would leave and my dad would stay to defend the house. And I grew up just having nightmares about saying goodbye to my dad. And for me, as I grew to understand what the impacts of climate change are going to be and are now increasingly, that's what it feels like for me. I recently had a really profound experience where when I read the book Firestorm, I'm not sure if any of you have come across it, by former commissioner of what do they call it in New South Wales? Fire and Rescue New South Wales. Greg Mullins is his name, and he recently founded Emergency Leaders for Climate Action. Greg has been a frontline firefighter for 5 decades more, and his book tells the story of how he's watched fire seasons change over the decades. He accounts from the early 90s, he has witnessed seasons changing quite profoundly. He describes first-hand accounts of fire tornadoes, increasingly common pyrocumulonimbus storms where the fire is so strong that it creates its own weather. And the fires that Greg describes in his book, he fought in Black Summer and Black Saturday. The fires that he describes are so different from the ones that we had when I was a kid. Scientists tell us that we've probably got this is a really hard thing to think through, but we've probably got 2 decades of warming already locked in because of the pollution that we've already put into the atmosphere. That means that we're going to face increasingly dangerous fire seasons and storm seasons as well. Like I said, I'm calling in from Melbourne, and we have just been hammered by storms the last few weeks. And we're looking down the face of another pretty wet and stormy weekend as well. This wild weather there's 2 decades of this locked in, and that's a difficult thing to come to terms with. But what happens after that is up to us. In 2040, my kids are going to be in their 20s, and they're going to be thinking about having families of their own. And the decisions that we make now as a community will determine whether or not the world's safe for them. So at Climate for Change, we've got a mission to create the social climate in Australia for effective action on climate change. Climate for Change is volunteer powered, like your organisation. We're a non-profit that enables everyday Australians to have better conversations about climate change and take action. We know that it's not the climate science that we lack. It's not solutions that we lack. It's the social and political will to fix the problem. Right now, we've got new policies, we've got technologies and practices developed all around the world that, when implemented at scale, can stop and reverse global warming. But business, governments, the community, we're not implementing them at the scale and at the speed that we need. Scientists tell us that we've got a decade to really act, to cut emissions deeply, fast across the economy if we're going to avoid the worst impacts of climate change. We were absolutely over the moon at the May election this year, where we saw climate featured so prominently in the outcome of the election. We had those incredible women, independents, coming through with a really strong and passionate focus on serious climate action and bringing that to Parliament. And we've seen the effects of that already. Those MPs in formerly safe Liberal heartland seats, and also really interesting progressive swings across the board, actually, in areas where politicians will tell us that people don't care about climate change. We had progressive swings in almost every rural and regional electorate, and we had progressive swings in 7 of the 8 electorates that have coal assets, which is just extraordinary to think about. But we've got to act now. So the policies that the incoming Labor government have put forward are a lot stronger, significantly stronger than the previous government, but still nowhere near what scientists tell us we need to do. So the task now is to act with urgency and to act with ambition. We know that most Australians are concerned about climate change. It hovers somewhere around the mid 70%. 70% of people across the board, across demographics, across geographies, and across the political voting spectrum are concerned about climate change. But interestingly, very few people talk about it with their friends and family. Not many more than 20% of people have ever had a conversation with their friends and family about climate change. And so very few people are engaged or activated around the issue. And that means that governments don't feel the urgency to act with the speed and ambition that we need. And a lot of people feel alone in their concerns and not connected to communities already taking action on the issue. Research shows us that personal and social change happens when we hear and see others like us acting, and when we hear messages from messengers that we trust. So that's what our Climate Conversations framework is built up around. We support people to bring together their social networks, their friends, their family, their peers. It might be a parents group, it might be a sports club, it might be a group just like yours, bringing people together over a meal or online increasingly, which is a little bit less nice, but it works. Bring people together to talk about climate change. What we do is we send a trained facilitator along to have the conversation. We go through the science of climate change. We connect people emotionally on the issue. The facilitator guides people to consider how climate change might impact them and their families, their communities. And then we take attendees of the conversations through a workshop on how to take action. how to divest your super and your banking from polluting fossil fuels, how to contact your local MP, and then how to host another conversation like the one that you've just been part of. So this is happening all over the country. So far we've reached 13,000 people across the country through our really deep and often quite transformative climate conversations. We've got volunteer facilitators in every state and territory around the country, which is really exciting. We've got a DIY program where we support organisations just like yours actually to build and deliver a climate conversation to reach into your own constituencies. So far, we've supported the Jewish Climate Network, we've supported the Environment Centre, Northern Territory, local councils all over Australia to build their own conversations program. And as well as supporting the program across the country, one thing that we've recently been focused on is focusing our program in key strategic communities that are really well placed to push towards cross-party support within our parliament for strong climate action. So leading into the election, we supported volunteers to really supercharge their efforts in 2 key federal electorates, North Sydney in New South Wales and Ryan up in Queensland. And now we've got lead volunteers in regional Queensland where we're supporting them to build community power to really speed up the transition to clean energy in Queensland. We saw an incredible announcement from the Queensland state government just at the end of last month where they're really ramping up ambition and speed of their transition. They have a goal now of getting out of coal-fired power in Queensland by 2035, which is just extraordinary. And there's going to have to be a huge shift in community support if that is going to be done well, fair, with decent community consultation. So that's a job that organisations like ours can do to really socialise these bold and ambitious plans when governments come up with them. So it's pretty exciting. I also am going to be a bit cheeky and take this opportunity to say that as community volunteers, you know that this work is incredibly difficult to support and fund. We run on the smell of an oily rag, and every year we host a crowdfunder, which we've got live right now. We're trying to get to $150,000 by the end of this month. And I'm just going to be cheeky and pop a link in the chat. I would just absolutely love it if you're in a position to give, if you would consider it, because it makes a huge difference for us. And I know that you understand how difficult it is to run an organisation powered by volunteers, and every little bit of support counts. So I'm going to stop there. I think I've probably gone on for long enough, but I'm definitely happy to answer any questions that you might have. Or like I said at the start, we've got a lot of tips and tricks that we can talk you through on how to have effective climate conversations. We also have workshops that our team run for groups like yours on how to have those effective conversations about climate change. And also, of course, at any time, we've got people that you can reach out to actually host a conversation yourself if you're interested in doing that. So I'll wrap it up there, and it's just been an absolute pleasure joining you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Obviously, we'd all like to ask you questions.
Yeah.
How long are your events? So say, for example, I know you referred to it online as like a Tupperware party, sort of like a party,
yes.
party plan, which
yeah.
So how long do you need to allow for to have a decent discourse?
Great question. A tangential story I'll tell is that Katarina Gator, our founder, used to actually sell Tupperware. That's how she came up with this model. She was a greenie for ages, and she just sort of sat with this idea that this horrible thing's happening. She had little kids at the time and she was really worried about their future. This thing was ticking over in the back of her head. And to support her kids having flexible work, she sold Tupperware, and she always felt uncomfortable about the plastic and everything. And then she thought, actually, you could use this model for good. It's such a powerful, she's using it to sell stuff. And it's such a powerful thing to bring together people who trust each other and know each other. And the Tupperware model worked so effectively, because if you're trying to sell something to your friend, you're not going to sell them something that you don't believe in. And it's the same thing with climate change. Your question was around how long we account for. Our climate conversations go for 2 hours. That's the standard framework. And we start with a video that goes for about 15 minutes about the impacts and the science. and then we go through a series of workshops. And we are actually just trialing a shorter conversation for just 1 hour, because, to be honest, the 2-hour climate conversation, while it is very deep and very transformative, and once you've got people in that setting for such a long time, you can have a really deep and meaningful conversation, but that is a barrier for people these days. Not many people want to sit online for 2 hours. I'm sure you've experienced difficulty getting people along, especially on a bright sunny day. So we're trialing shorter conversations, and we've also got what we call a climate chat, where we have a framework that guides people in having a shorter 15-minute conversation one-on-one rather than in a group. So interested to see how those two new formats go, but our traditional setting is 2 hours. And it's usually over a meal, which is lovely. There's something very human about bringing people together to share food. Online, that's a bit more difficult, but people bring along a glass of wine. And
how you do that online, yeah.
Yeah. It's not as nice, but it does actually. The flip side of it is that it allows us to reach communities that would have been a lot harder to reach in the past. So I shared that we've got a partnership with Environment Centre Northern Territory. We do not have staff up in Darwin, or we've got an emerging volunteer base, but just because we've been able to do remote organising. So that's sort of the silver lining, I suppose, to having to go online for everything.
I'm opening it to the floor. Are there any other questions from on the floor? Vicky has got her hand up. Unmute yourself. Unmute yourself, Vicky.
Lovely, thank you. Jane, I was reading on our website about the climate fresque game. Have you used that as a means by which to create those communication sessions at all?
I've never heard of it. I'm really interested to know what it is.
Well, Carol.
Well, got cards at work. Climate Fresque, they basically have 52 cards. On one side is a picture, and on the other side is the commentary about the picture. And what you do is, they're about sort of A5 size, the pictures, and you grab a group of people together at the workplace where I work. We do this, and you get the cards, have a really long table, and you have the conversation about how the cards all relate to each other. And if you have a large piece of paper behind it, you get everyone to stick the cards on, and they draw lines between them to get the relationships, and then they actually artistically put designs around them, and then you can just hang it up on the wall. It's quite big, but it's they're really quite a good way of breaking the ice and just having a conversation. So it's
that's beautiful. I love that.
I'll send you the details about it.
Yeah, I'd love you to.
Yeah,
I'll share it with my team. They'll love it.
Yeah, exactly. So you can actually print them off and what have you. Off Fresque.
Great.
I'll do that. But it's quite good fun. Quite good fun. What challenge? I mean, you've obviously been in quite a lot of conversations, Jane. What sort of challenges do you get? Have you ever been in a place where you get the wall of coal? No.
Yes. How best to answer this? So there's a few tips and tricks that you learn along the way as you have more and more of these conversations. Firstly, and I absolutely cannot underline this enough, there are some people that you are never going to convince, whose minds are never going to change. We've got a framework we use, which is called a spectrum of allies, and you can rank people based on their perceptions of climate change. And what we try to do is, say you've got number 1 is a strong ally, number 2 is a weak ally, number 3 is undecided, 4 is weak oppose, 5 is strong oppose. And if you come across a number 3 who's undecided, your goal in that conversation is to push them over into being a number 2. You're not trying to turn everyone into a strong supporter straight away, but you're trying to shift people a little step along the way towards supporting your issue. If you come across someone who strongly opposes your issue, my advice to you would be to thank them for their time and walk away from it, because there are some people you're just never going to oppose. You're just never going to convince. Deep climate skeptics. To be honest, there's less and less of these people these days. About 4% of the population are hard climate skeptics. Those people tend to have big platforms though. So it's easy to think that there's more of them out there than there actually are. And there might be some people who have received a lot of misinformation over the years. So step number one is to figure out who you're talking to and what they care about, and whether you have any values that align with their values. Whether or not you express those values in the same way is a really important question to answer for yourself as you're having this conversation. And the easiest way to do that is to ask questions and to listen and to find out what they care about. So someone might not like a big new wind development that's going up in their community, for example, but they might have this niggling feeling in the back of their head that something's going on. They've got a couple of kids or grandkids. A lot of people that I speak to have had grandchildren for the first time, and all of a sudden have this urge to really protect the future that they're going to see. And so the task is to figure out whether you have a set of shared values that is articulated in the same way or in a different way that you can tap into and share your story as well. So the story that I told you at the start of this session is my way of articulating to you my experience and what brought me to this work and why I care about the things that I do. Your job in a conversation is to try and draw that story out of the person that you're talking to. Right. Share your own, because stories are how we connect with people and how we form bonds of trust. And if you form a bond of trust with someone, you're more likely to be able to be in a position to convince them of something. And you're lucky if you already share a bond of trust. That's a really powerful thing. And if you stomp all over it by saying, I'm right and you're wrong, that's not going to work. But if you listen and you try to form a connection, that's going to get you a long step along the way.
That sounds good. Say, for example, I don't know, Anna's got a question.
No, please go ahead, Carol. I wait.
No, go please, Annika.
Okay, thank you very much for this interesting information. I'm from the other part, Sweden, the opposite part in some way. I'm just curious about, do you know if this model, if it's in place in some other areas of the world? Do you work internationally in some way? Because I mean, climate questions or climate issues are something that affects all of us. So I'm just curious.
Absolutely. And it's a great question. I know I told you about our DIY program. We work with an organisation in Scotland, actually, to build a conversation program within what they have they're called Scottish Communities for Climate Action. They're a coordinating body for a whole lot of climate action organisations over there. So they're building a climate conversation program exactly the same. And we've got a volunteer board, and one of our board members is French and is a part of an organisation in France who do exactly the same thing. So these are the ones that I know of, and I'm sure that there must be many more around the place. Conversations are a very human thing to have, and our model has been based on social research that is very, has been around since the 80s, based on this model of social proof and, building trust and trusted messengers. It's a very common framework that has been put to many different applications, and I'd be really surprised if there's not more groups around like us.
Thank you.
I'm just speaking generally to the group. Would you be interested in us hosting one, just to have a conversation, have a think tank meeting as a hosted conversation workshop event? Nods, more nods.
Yeah,
really good.
Oh, we'd love that.
I've been thinking
that's so good.
how we actually have one.
Yes, I think if we can do one with the think tank first, we may find that we can encourage clubs to actually have their conversations as well. So I think we all want practice on learning how to do this, and because we all read things, but it's different when you can actually have an experienced facilitator facilitating what happens, and you can see the role modeling of what goes on. So I think what I will do is we'll work out it'll probably be this sort of time, because it works quite well across the time zones, but we'll just have an extra event and see how we go with it. So
that's fabulous.
Do you have a limit?
Sorry, Carol. Keep going.
Whoever spoke, go for it.
That was me. Sorry, I was just going to say, Carol, that's a really great idea, because I was sitting here thinking if we do it in the think tank, we can then perhaps encourage by area or district to have one in their, or by area, sorry, to have one in their workshops, their advocacy workshop, and have that climate conversation facilitated through that, because that day gives them an opportunity to have a really good go at it.
Yeah, and allowing 2 hours would be good, because we can have it, you know, we can get people to sort of have, you know, bring a drink, bring a snack, have your time online over the thing. So for more us in Australia, in Western Australia, it'll probably be a coffee, but you later in the day in the eastern states, you'll be on your wine by then. So you know, so we could have a bit of fun with it. And you know, I think it sounds great, Jane. I just like the way of just being nurtured through the process. I think we're all I think it is searching for that.
Yeah, it is something that we notice is, like I said, people often feel alone in their concern for this issue, because we as a community aren't used to talking about having difficult conversations. But like you say, it's really heavy content, and it's difficult to actually sit down and look it in the face. You know, I'm trained in climate science, and even so, when I see this video and you really sit down and think about what's coming down the line for us, it's difficult to think through. For my job, I have to read those horrible IPCC reports when they come out. And the latest mitigation report had a quote from one of the co-authors that said, there is a narrowing window for securing a livable future on this planet. And when you sit and really, truly think about a statement like that, it's awful. It's awful to think through, and to have a trained facilitator to guide us through the emotions that come up when you experience that, and when you hear something like that, and then think, how does this affect my community and what can I do about it? When I hear that, I just want to, I don't know what I want to do. Part of me wants to chain myself to the coal-fired power station like those incredible Extinction Rebellion people, but I don't, because I have a job that I don't want to lose. But you know, you want to take action that feels commensurate to the scale of the problem, and it's just wonderful and very nourishing to have a trained facilitator to help you understand what those actions are that you can take in your own life that feel comfortable and feel right for you, and then connect you to a community of people already taking action. I just quickly want to respond to something that Bronwyn put in the chat. We have worked closely, well, not worked closely, but I've had lots of conversations with various people from the Victorian Women's Trust. They pioneered this model, not this exact model, ours is an adaptation of that, but the kitchen table conversation model that the Victorian Women's Trust came up with is just, it's been a game changer in so many different communities. It's been used so powerfully in those, you know, election campaigns, but more broadly to encourage and facilitate community participation in democracy in various different settings. And I just can't speak highly enough of it. I think it's such an incredible model. They do such good work.
Now, our mission, we're all about creating a gender equal climate justice future. And so it would be quite good if we could obviously have the workshop, but if we can sort of sew in some examples from that space as well, then so we can have our own traditional one first, but then we can see how we could thread in our mission within it, so as we can roll it out to the clubs and areas, so it fits the bill, you know what I mean? So I
love that idea. We've got I said that there's a few organizations we work with where we develop conversation programs that are fit for their community and their constituencies, and that, I think that's such a fabulous idea. We can definitely think through how to adapt the model for your community. Absolutely.
But to give us time first, we can have the traditional one first, and then we can have the conversation around that. I think would be really good. Okay, well, we'll see if we can get something moving before Christmas. And how much notice do you need to have to organise them?
It can work around you. I'll put you in touch with one of our facilitators. We've
Right.
got loads of people that can help you out. And I'll send that email as soon as I'm off the call now. So you've got something waiting for Monday, and yeah,
That
won't
sounds
take
great.
long.
Okay, well, did anyone have any other questions for Jane, bearing in mind she's got sick children?
I've always got sick children. It never ends.
No, just
So
make-
Jane,
I've got
I
a
just
hand
want
up.
to say we've had a wonderful conversation with you. It's been absolutely fantastic. You've even managed to move us on a bit further. I think we're really thrilled about that idea of working to have a proper climate for change conversation. It was really funny, actually. I mean, I didn't think about it at the time, but 10 minutes before this meeting started, I had the neighbourhood children playing in our garden. And I said to them, I've got to go in, you'll have to take them. And I said, I'm going to this meeting. And they're not people I've ever talked about what I do with, because they're busy, they've got 3 kids, they've got their business. I've never really thought they'd be that interested in climate change. And when I said what I was doing, the mum turned around to the 2 older children who are in grade 1 and kinder and explained to them why it was so important for Sue to go to this meeting, because it was going to help them to have a good world for when they got older that they'd actually be able to live in. And I was like, wow, I had totally not thought of approaching these people. Where are you at now? What can I help you with? So, we all live and learn a great deal all the time. But also, Jane, the way that you've had a conversation today, you've drawn us in to your life and your experience to start with. And then you've talked about the big issues and then what we can do, and it's absolutely perfect. So thank you.
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. It's been lovely joining you.
Yeah, we'll be in touch.
We'll be in
Sounds
touch.
great. Thanks so much for your time. Take care.
Thank you, Jane. Really appreciate it. Thanks a lot.
Ta-da.
Rounds of applause all round. Thank you. Wow. Wasn't she wonderful?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah. So I thought that was really great. Well, we'll get ourselves back on track again. Okay.
I think that was great, Carol, that lots of people are putting in the chat about, then working it on, that it may come up in area workshops.
Yeah.
People are mostly comfortable with those people in their area. So that's a great possibility.
Yeah, but I think if we can sort of do a testing within our think tank first, because we've got our own little community here, and then we can sort of see how it can roll out to the different areas and potentially clubs further down the track.
Yeah.
Wow, fantastic. What a great organisation. So, it's great because they're all volunteers. So it's it's incredible as well. Well, now we come over to Lesley. I was looking, Lesley, at how to introduce you today. And I remember I went to the District 23 conference introduction where you were introduced by Val Sara when you were introducing Mary Crooks. And you explained how you did nursing first, but found you were unsuited and went to occupational health and safety, and how you advocate from the workers to the shop floor, from the shop floor to the CEOs, and advocate now in Zonta. But what you weren't able to mention was what an absolute fantastic host you are and how much you like to have fun. Because I had the privilege of staying with Lesley when I went to South Australia to speak at their area workshops there. And you were just great. So I'll stop the share and let you tell your story, Lesley.
Thanks very much, Carol. So yes, as you mentioned, started life, finished my training and took a deep breath and thought, well, that was all very well, but I didn't think I was very suited to the detail focus that nursing requires. However, what I took away from it in the long term was we learnt to be good risk managers, and that was the foundation of some of the work I then took on as an occupational health nurse. Working in industry, I think the one I usually get asked a lot of questions around is the startup of the Adelaide Casino as an occupational health nurse. And Jane and I actually did that together, and we were part of the first team there. So it was a very different approach to occupational health nursing. And then into industry, I was more based into manufacturing after that. So what I did was I then thought, well, this is something I'm really interested in, and I actually did 2 years of occupational health nursing studies, and then did some HR studies, and then I followed up with a risk management course in Monash in Victoria. That took a bit of dedication on my part, because I actually drove to Melbourne once a month for lectures on the Saturday, and drove home again on Sunday, and then did my assignments when I got home. So that was an 18-month course. So that kind of kept me busy for a while.
Lesley, just let people know where you actually live in relation to Melbourne.
Okay, I lived in Adelaide at that time. So I used to knock off work at Friday lunchtime and just get in the car and get going to Melbourne and get in about 9 o'clock at night. So yeah, so it was a bit of effort there, but it was well worth it. And I've still got people from those courses in my network, and we keep in contact. So I think that's one of the outcomes of adult learning that you take away with you. But yeah, so working across manufacturing, I worked in the finance sector, and then went on to a role with Sunrice, the rice food company, as a group safety manager and environment. It was the first time I picked up environment, and it was early days back then. The organisation and I think we're all learning at the same time. And certainly the community was learning as well. So it was a great opportunity to find ways that could help the organisation, but also help the environment, especially around the rice food company, where our research organisation, there was a huge farm where they tried crossbreeding, etc., and growing different types of rice to reduce the amount of water that was used. And they were highly successful in that, and also in some instances reducing the time that the grain had to grow in. So it was a very innovative time, if you like, and it was very exciting being involved there, not just in Australia, but in the US and Thailand and Vietnam and Jordan. So I got to travel a fair bit. And it's not as glamorous as people think, just as some of us will know. So that role then led me to being General Manager of Occupational Health and Safety with elders. I'm trying to think, sort of making sure I keep a little bit of a timeline here. So I covered that for about 18 months. And unfortunately at the time, Elders was not doing too well financially. And so they retrenched the whole corporate office. I was probably more fortunate. They actually transferred me to Melbourne, and I spent another year working with the automotive side of their business, again, in not only Australia, but Thailand and the US. And I always talk about the challenging role in trying to get the workers that were embedded in the Tesla factory, because we built the seats for the Tesla factory, and getting them to understand that white walls was not a very safe thing for forklift drivers, because there was no depth perception. So they couldn't work out why their forklift operators were hitting walls all the time. So yes, so lots of little different things there that that you see in different behaviours with different people, different cultures, and learning to work with them and making sure that we could get the same outcomes internationally for the organisation. And that was where I learnt, I guess, on those last 2 roles, was establishing a system of work, or system for occupational health and safety and environment, that was the same, the whole of the organisation. What didn't matter what country you were in, what location, that was the standard that we implemented. So people didn't have to work with lots of documentation. We just had the one process, and it worked very well. So once that they sold off the automotive division, I then took up a 6-month contract with Sydney Harbour City Ferries, and the kids still call them, they're all my ferries, by the way. They're Lesley's ferries or Nana's ferries. So, and that was a lovely gig. I really enjoyed it, but I turned down the offer to continue the employment with them. I decided I really did not enjoy the Sydney lifestyle, and I certainly couldn't replicate the lifestyle I had in Melbourne or Adelaide, not only financially, but just getting around. It was really difficult in that sense, although public transport's fantastic. That bit I enjoyed. I then came back to Adelaide. I took up a contract then with Department of Health and Human Services in Victoria as the Chief OHS Officer. And I could never work out why I was called the Chief. I kept thinking I should have a hat to go with the role, but they wouldn't give me one. But it was just a public service term. And so once that contract was finishing, I took up a national role with Adelaide Brighton Cement, which owns a lot of companies around Australia. With many of them, they don't change the name of. So like in WA, you've got Coburn Cement, they own that. And then in Northern Territory, Queensland and also New South Wales and Victoria, there's a whole range of different organisations. That only lasted 12 months. I had strong differences of opinion with the Executive General Manager, and we decided to call it quits. So I then moved into semi-retirement and volunteering. So I still do a bit of work. I work with Compass facilities management at Roxby Downs or Olympic Dam, and sometimes over in the Pilbara. And I also work with the Australian Industry Group, doing training and audits for them. So just some background stuff in between everything else. Yeah. So I guess I just get to work when I want to work, not when somebody says I should. So yeah, I hope that sort of gives you a bit of a cover of my background experience, managing teams, working with people, advocating. Occupational health and safety sadly always needs a fair bit of advocating to get things done well and to the benefit of all players in the organisation. So that's probably the best way to put it.
So how do you find it reconciles on your climate journey? Because I mean, you've mentioned a few names here. We've got cement, 8% of the world's emissions are from cement. You look at Roxby Downs, isn't that uranium?
Yeah, right, it's uranium, gold, nickel, copper. Yeah,
okay.
They cover quite a lot of the metals, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, how do I reconcile it? Yeah, it's for me, working with the facilities management was still again it was like working in a holiday resort, because you've got all these cabins, you've got people moving in and out on a weekly basis, you've got your housekeeping, your groundskeeping and your maintenance. I probably enjoyed working with the maintenance guys the best, in that sense that they're a little bit more down to earth than some of the other areas. But with working with Adelaide Brighton, covering the environment was really very much about driving down the emissions and making sure that the level of pollution, not only meeting the EPA requirements, but we worked a lot with the community that lived around the operations side of things were never happy. And I don't mean that in a nasty way. I guess in some ways they brought cheap housing because it was close to a cement factory, but then they didn't want the offside of that being the cement dust floating around in your community. And it did. There's no getting away from that. But it was also finding ways to reduce that. And we were using construction waste and in burning in the kilns instead of trying to burn coal or gas or whatever. So again, we were looking at ways to take product that was a waste and would have been put back into the ground or, used or left laying around, and making sure that we could actually burn it off in a way that didn't actually pollute the community. So there was a lot of work being done there, and I know a lot of that's continued and making a difference. Yeah.
Does anyone have any other questions that they would like to ask Lesley? Just looking at the hands. Go through a couple of pages. No. Okay. Okay. Do you find that with your advocacy work that you did through your work, do you find that that's been an absolute benefit for you with Zonta? Do you find that your work life and your home life, how do they go together?
Yeah. So what it does is I guess when you're advocating in the workplace, your network and the people you need to talk to are nailed down in the job. So you're not chasing them all over the countryside, if you like. You can either stroll into an office or pick up the phone and go, hey guys, you know, we need to do something about this, or there's another meeting. You know, there's always meetings in business where you get to expand or influence. So in that sense, it was a lot easier, if you like, or more convenient. Whereas when you're advocating like this, it's because I'd spent so much more time in Melbourne and in the Riverina, my network is in those states. So I've had to actually really think and learn, how am I going to network here politically, and not just in South Australia, but as the district advocacy chair, networking again with the likes of like Amanda Rishworth, and before that it was Anne Rushton. So so getting in front of those people and having the conversations, making sure I'm well read. At the moment, I've just finished a book called Invisible Women, and it's an absolute eye-opener around gender inequality. Scares the hell out of me because I mean, you know, it's there, but I don't think we understand the depth of it. And the book really is just the surface of it, even though it's very well researched. At the moment, I'm working my way through the new national plan against violence that's just been released and being promoted by the government, the federal government. It's 144 pages. I'm skipping some, I'll tell you that now, but I'm hoping to get to the crux of it shortly, and that we can actually then look at how I can tie this with the gender equality that we're looking at with climate action and Zonta's principles, and what can we pick from it to drive with our next layer of advocacy as a district. And I'm also setting up meetings with the other 2 districts in Australia, their advocacy chairs, and following up with them and seeing if we can get a more national approach as Zonta. Again, that's my organisational approach, is you take the lead players and try and influence and then get an agreement around what we're actually going to focus on. And then each district will drive that through our own advocacy chairs in the areas. So that's the principle, if you like, Carol, and that's a reapplying of what I learned in the workplace and applying it in Zonta.
Question from Sue. Mute, Sue.
Unmute. Lesley, from your experience of working with these big companies like concrete companies and Roxby Downs and that, do you think they've now got to the point where they're saying, well, we seriously have to look at our emissions, we seriously have to look at the way we do things, that there's no trying to fudge figures now or anything like that, trying to take shortcuts? You know, we have to change our way of business, and we accept that now, we see the benefits of it.
Thanks, Suzanne. It's a bit of a double-edged question or answer, if you like. And, my first thought was, well, it really depends who's sitting in the chair of the CEO or general manager. If you look at like Compass with the facilities management, they were already doing things and I guess trying to work with BHP, because BHP owns the site, but they are getting in things that will recycle food waste, because there is an awful lot of food waste coming off the kitchens, because they're feeding on average around 2,000 to 3,000 people every week, 3 times a day. So you can imagine there's quite a bit of waste coming off that. So they're actually looking at recycling of that. So yes, they are looking at opportunities. I think the thing that most organisations have finally worked out, which was the brief that we were, or the drum we were banging at Sunrise, is it's usually a positive impact to an organisation financially if they actually do participate in environmentally conscious actions to reduce their impact on the environment. And that's, you know, I remember trying to talk the engineer into putting up a cost activity, if you like, around putting on solar panels on all the paddy sheds, because I was really excited about solar panels at the time. And I thought there was a great opportunity, because as the paddy sheds did not actually use that much electricity to run, and it would have been a way to breach it. But he was going, no, it won't work. But what it did do was start to shift his thinking. So I mightn't have won, you know, that minor skirmish, but the battle went on into, well, let's look at other ways. How do we monitor our electricity or our energy use? And then they broke that down and started to look at, well, what's happening in the manufacturing of the rice and rice cakes, etc. And what they found was that they were using all these compressors, using up energy and waste, and they all leaked. So they actually shut down that system and put in a whole different system and reduced their energy waste. So that's, you know, it's a small win, if you like, at the time, but it's getting that change and shift in thinking. Are they all getting there, Suzanne? Look, I think only as much as the rest of the community is, and every organisation, and this is my saying, is a microcosm representative of our communities as a whole. So you've got the good, bad and the ugly. Doesn't matter which way you go. And it really depends on the person at the top.
Well, thank you so much for that, Lesley. That's been quite enlightening to see what's been going on in your life, and thank you for contributing and sharing your story today. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thanks, Carol. And I'm happy to take questions if anybody, you know, later, if anybody wants to ring or email me, it's not a problem.
Excellent. Well, we'll move on. Thank you.
Good.
So what we're going to, thank you very much to Lesley. And the next one, just a bit of international news. Just to be aware that we have a Zonta Says Now working group internationally, and we have our first meeting tomorrow, which should be quite interesting. We've developed a rollout strategy, which we've submitted to Zonta International, and some information to go on a web page. And we're working out timelines and things that we can do. We need to, we developed the strategy, the think tank. We hope to launch a landing page for the website internationally, have a communications plan, develop materials for clubs, look at what we can do for the Commission of the Status of Women in International Women's Day events, and what we can do in that space as we move forward. And that's just in the first few months. Anyway, one thing which really came up in our research was the conversation today is about the global north and the global south. So I want you to be aware of what those terms mean. So on this map here, the global north are all the countries in blue. So even though we're in the south, we're actually counting as the global north. And the global north countries are responsible for 92% of the global carbon dioxide emissions, yet most of the impacts are experienced by the global south. So one of the things that we can do in Zonta is to join the conversations between the global north and the global south. When we're talking about Zonta Says Now, it's an amplifier. What we're trying to do with Zonta Says Now is really accelerate and amplify Zonta's activities. So we have all the work that we're doing around gender equality. We have the work around the elimination of violence against women. And we have the international, you know, the Sustainable Development Goal 5 in here. We have the Paris Agreement, the Sendai Framework for Disaster Response, CSW 66 statements, which is all about climate and women and disaster response, and our own statements on climate change. And then we have the Istanbul Convention on the saying no to violence against women. They all work hand in hand. They're all together. So what we do with gender equality impacts on climate action and on violence against women. So they all work together. You could put these in any order. So it's just to be aware of the relationship. One thing which came up in our studies as well was I hadn't appreciated that in your brain, you have a limbic brain, which is where you experience your emotions and your decisions. But your communication takes place in your neocortex brain. That's where all your rational part of your brain works. So trying to get into this limbic brain is what we need to do, connect to the emotions, because that's where your decision making is done. Isn't that interesting? I always thought that my decision making was done by my irrational part of my brain, but it's not. It's done from my heart. So when you have a gut feel about something, that's what we're getting at. You're connecting with your limbic brain. So I thought that was interesting. I also had to do a video for the Zonta International website, and you'll have a big laugh when you see it. It's Carol's version of David Attenborough in my back garden, okay? And I have every I just an awe of what David Attenborough does, because mine took about 4 hours doing 40 seconds because aeroplanes kept flying overhead and I'm in the middle of suburbia, and trying to make it quiet was hilarious. Anyway, the Zonta Club of Arnsberg in Germany had a Zonta Says Now night, which I thought you'd be interested to see. And so I thought that was lovely that Gundula sort of shared these photos from her evening. And I also did a presentation to the Zonta E-Club of Finland. And my technology went dreadfully wrong. And you know how you have those nights when things just don't go to plan. That was definitely one of them. Very challenging night, but we got through it. Also, how are you all faring with the floods? Just tell me your stories. What's happening for you? Vicky.
Thank you. I only just made the meeting, Carol, because there's a bridge that links northwest Tasmania with the far northwest Tasmania, and very significant in terms of agricultural exchanges and deliveries, etc. And I almost didn't make it because this bridge was impacted by the floods, and one of the pylons is needing repair. It's quite bad. So I had to wait, I suppose, a full hour, being basically stationary, to get across this one-lane bridge. Luckily, it was one lane. Otherwise, I'd still be right up in the far northwest of Tasmania and wouldn't be talking to you now. Thank you. Yeah, it's touch and go at the moment up here in northwest Tasmania, very much.
Has anyone had to put sandbags out?
No sandbags.
I mean, because you can see in the map here, I'm over in the west, and we've had hardly anything, but over in the east, you're basically sodden, you know. So it was.
So Carol, last Friday, not yesterday, the Friday before, we spent the day rescuing kangaroos from our local park because we're on the Yarra. Yeah. And it flooded, and we've got a population of about 30 kangaroos, and they panicked. And some of the older ones can swim, but the joeys can't. And so the joeys tried to swim after their mothers. We ended up having to call out a group called Vets for Compassion, and they were fantastic. And they went in and rescued some of the joeys. We had 2 die, but they managed to rescue more than that. So it was great. But yeah, we went away a week or so ago camping for the week, and we drove up to Haddon Lakes and Mungo National Park, and there was water everywhere. It was interesting to see the mallee wet instead of dry, but it certainly made us appreciate how other people are living at the moment with the floods.
Yeah. Sandra.
Just a note, you will know that in 2011, Lynn Simons, who lives at Carisbrook, my sister, well, Carisbrook was quite safe this time, and I think maybe 2 or 3 houses might have gone under, but she was safe. She didn't go through all that again because the whole town pretty much went under last time. But northern Victoria is still locked off, so if you want to travel around in the northern part of the state, it's very, very difficult because a lot of the roads are closed. Echuca still hasn't reached its highest point of flooding yet. And yesterday I heard someone on the radio saying that there's so much water going into the Chuka that parts of the Murray are going actually backwards because of the force of the water that's coming in around the Chuka, so like in the Barmah forest. So yeah, there are a lot of people who are impacted, and a lot of livestock, and a lot of kangaroos and koalas and wombats and other animals. But I think it has actually been, we had a lot of heavy rain last night here in Melbourne. There's been quite a lot of heavy rain around Shepparton and the north. So yeah, not good.
Anyway, just to let you know that Robin, did you have your hand up then? Put yourself off mute, Robin. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm with Zonta Mitchell, and Mitchell includes Seymour. So Seymour went underwater last week, and there are a lot of houses and people impacted there. So we're going to be getting in touch with some of the support crew that are still working through Seymour. They say that they've started doing a cleanup. The problem is that this weekend there's already been more rain. Our local, I'm a bit further south, but our local creeks all run into the Goulburn River, and it's already completely full, and that's the river that floods Seymour. So there's more on the way, and their cleanup might have to be held up by further flooding tomorrow and Monday. So it's still ongoing. We had to cancel our meeting not last week, not last Thursday, Thursday before, when Alwyn was meant to be coming down from Albury to speak to us about convention. She still came down, but had to, it was just before all the flooding really hit us. So she did come down. We had to cancel our meeting, so we had a nice little chat, and she would have had to take a very interesting route back to Albury because of all the flooding. But yeah, there's probably more on the way.
Yeah, well, we're thinking of you and over from the west, while our thoughts are with you in the east. So thank you for sharing. Thank you. As we just move forward, we have the Climate Change Act that was enacted on the 14th of September. I just want to bring up a couple of things with this. The targets: by 2030, net emissions 43% below 2005, net zero by 2050. Climate reports annually by the Minister for Climate Change. And then we have the Climate Change Authority actually advises on the targets for the national determined contributions, which go into the UN COPs for meeting our requirements under the Paris Climate Agreements. But it's the Consequential Amendments Act that I hadn't picked up when I read through this act, first of all. And that is the targets and objectives and functions of some federal agencies now include these climate provisions, so that they have to take into account those emission targets. So it's a way of making sure that everyone keeps on track. So the Climate Change Authority keeps advice to the Minister for Climate Change. The Minister for Climate Change does his annual report to Parliament, and so the Climate Change Authority keeps up to date with how we're progressing to meet our obligations under the United Nations Paris Agreement. I just wanted to give you the heads up on that one. We've got the District 23 conference in Bunbury. Sandra, did you want to speak to this?
Yes, and of course it's a better world is the theme that Kay has for the conference. So I hope everybody who's online and Zontans will be coming. We'll have visitors as well, which would be great. But I just wanted to say that Dr. Anne Paulina, who Carol put me onto as a great speaker in regard to climate and the future and how we'll work together, has agreed to attend. And she's a very busy woman, as Professor Anne Paulina. She is actually from the Kimberley, and we did want to focus on people from Western Australia. And she's a human rights activist as well, but she really will tell us her story and engagement with the rivers in the Kimberley and the main river, the Fitzroy River. But she's quite well renowned for the work and research that she has done. So we're quite excited that she has agreed to attend. We're also looking at having maybe a local speaker from Collie. We're not sure if that's happening yet, but talking about that transition, and so people have a bit of an idea of how a community's transitioning, because Collie's already starting to go through that. And for people who aren't from Western Australia, Collie is a coal town, basically built on coal. So it's a big transition for them. We're also hoping to get Rebecca Prince-Roos, who started Plastic Free July, but she's very busy and travels a lot. So they've put it in, but they cannot confirm until sometime next year whether we'll be able to have her. And we're also looking at a speaker to do with domestic violence from Esperance, who's done a lot of work in that area, and some other women who work in the lithium industry, which, as we know, if we're moving to an electric world, this is something we need, and there's a fair bit of it in Western Australia, so we'll have that. But having Professor Anne Paulina on deck already is terrific. I've also, thanks to Joe Widdock, put in for a small grant from the Climate Action Network Australia. Did that last weekend. Just to cover some of the costs of our speakers. Now, Anne Paulina is not charging us a speaking fee, but, you know, there are travel fees and accommodation and all sorts of things like that. So, yeah, we're still hunting. Yeah.
Thank you, Sandra, for that update. I'm just realised what the time is. I just want to be aware that I'll hand over to Sue to talk about the Melbourne on Yarra Climate Action Award.
So Carol, jump in here too if you want to, and I think Jazz might have left. So Emma Cutting has been the winner of the Climate Action Award, Women Taking Climate Action Award for this year, and it was really hard yet again. I mean, every time we've done this the last 2 years, we've got these brilliant people, these brilliant women applying in all sorts of different areas, but it's great because we're making all these contacts too. So the reason that Emma was chosen as the winner was because she's doing 2 projects, both which are really quite original, particularly her second one. Her first one is called the Heart Gardening Project, and this is where she's encouraging people to actually plant out their nature strip around local trees and things like that, with a combination of Indigenous and non-Indigenous plants appropriate to the area. And she's had a huge take up in some suburbs in Melbourne. And then her other project is actually to make what is called the Melbourne Pollination Corridor. And so her first project fits into that. But the idea is also that from the Royal Botanic Gardens, it's about 8 kilometres, I think, to Westgate Park, there's going to be this pollination corridor that bees and insects and everything can use. It doesn't mean there's continuous plantings, but close enough that they can use it. And she's working with about 50 scientists to put this project in, and she's made partnerships with places like the Royal Botanic Gardens and that. And her concept is to make a place which is wildlife friendly in the sense of the bees and the insects and some small animals and that, but it's also to bring people into contact with nature again, because people living in cities often don't really understand the importance of nature now, and nature in their backyard and beyond. And so when we were looking at the applications, we decided that for this year, that was the one that we would give our $1,000 to. So hopefully we can get Emma to speak to us at some stage. We'll also get her to speak to the Zonta Club of Melbourne on Yarra, and you can actually do a walk around some of her plantings. So I'm hoping that at some stage we might be able to organise for some of us who are around the area to do a walk with Emma as well.
That's brilliant, Sue. Thanks for that. There's the link to this 4-minute video will be in the notes for the meeting. So look at those at your leisure as we move forward. Vicky, you were doing a beach cleanup, weren't you? So
Yes.
For the club coming up.
Yes, we're having our beach cleanup tomorrow. And yes, for our Zonta Club of Devonport beach cleanup. So that's going to be really good fun. We're heading off in opposite directions and come back and meet in the middle and sort it all out when we get back into buckets and bibs and bobs. This one is pictures there are from the last fortnight ago. I was on another beach cleanup, but our Zonta Club will be doing ours tomorrow, and we're crossing fingers we'll be doing a good job, especially in terms of looking at single-use plastics impacting on our marine environment, of course. So yep, we want to be able to report back on that too next time we meet.
Excellent. That's brilliant. Just a couple of snippets. The podcast with Outrage and Optimism the other week with Zali Stegel and Mike Cannon-Brooks. If you haven't read The Big Switch, do so. And Jane Ardonetto sent me an email that I couldn't open about some Nespresso environmental awards that were being held. We look at some other business. We always try and showcase what 1 million women are doing because they really align with what we do. If you've not read Natalie's book, put it on your book list. Their current campaign is declaring the reef in danger for the Great Barrier Reef. So you can actually just click the link and sign the petition on that one. And if you haven't downloaded the app where you can actually monitor your own carbon uptake, please do so, because it's quite useful just to see how you're faring. We've got COP27 next month in Egypt. The Climate Council has got this petition going where you can actually send a message to your Australian leaders. You can send a postcard to Egypt. The main things for COP27 is rolling out the plans for how we're going to get to the emission reductions that we're all claiming we're going to do, firming up climate financing, having a new scheme for funding for addressing loss and damage, which will be very timely. The Global Methane Pledge, Australia still hasn't signed, so there'll be pressure on Australia to do so. Ending fossil fuel finance and hosting a future COP is one thing that Australia would like to do in partnership with the Pacific nation. So we'll see how that goes. Next year, look out for the NGO CSW Forum 67 and cracking the code for the International Women's Day. The theme for these is innovation and technological change and education in the digital age for achieving gender equality and the empowerment of women and girls. There is so much we can do through technology to make life easier for women to withstand the impacts of climate. So there's a little role in there for us as well. So that just to be aware of, that's the theme. And I'll send the link for this in the notes as well, but it's a video by UN Women Australia, and it's Equality, Our Final Frontier, and it shows you all the things that will be invented before women get gender equality. So it will really make you think. So it's these are all short videos that you'll be able to use in your clubs, and you'll be able to just sort of watch yourself as well. So our next meeting is on the 10th of December. And I'm pretty sure you'll still be on daylight saving hours in the eastern states for that one, so that'll be good. And I've also penciled in one for the 11th of February, so you can put those dates in your diary. I think that brings us up to date. Was there any final comments or questions from anybody today?
It's good.
Thank you so much for joining in today, and let's get to it and create this take our gender equal climate action to make a just, fair, sustainable world for women and girls. So thank you so much for your support. It's really appreciated.